Hello, dear learners. I once again welcome you to this MOOC on population and society. In the previous week modules, we have discussed about the different determinants of population change, that is fertility, mortality, and migration. We have learned how these variables contribute to population size and its changes. In this week, we shall be discussing in details about the different sources of population data and the history of population growth and transformation. This is the first module of the week, and in this module, that is module number 5, titled Population Census and Registration Method as Sources of Population Data, we shall discuss about census and civil registration system as two important sources which collects data on population and from where we can gather various informations on population. So, the basic objectives of this module are to explain the meaning of census and civil registration system and to discuss about the history of census, its purpose, the various data generated through census, to discuss about need, the types and the concept of civil registration system. So, dear learners, let us begin our discussion with the meaning and the history of census. Dear learners, in the previous modules of this MOOC, especially in module 1, we have learned why is it important for a nation to keep record of its population and how population data helps in planning and policy making. Now there are various sources from which we can gather information about population or obtain population data. Amongst this, census is one of the fundamental sources. Dear learners, you all must have heard the term census. It is one of the primary sources of population data. It collects and provides data about the population of a nation, its size, composition, location, and characteristics. Thus, a comprehensive data on different aspects of population is being provided by the census. The word census is derived from the Latin word censere, meaning to value or tax. A census may be defined as the total process of collecting, compiling and publishing demographic, economic and social data pertaining at a specified time or times to all persons in a country or a delimited territory. Census, therefore, is a comprehensive database, data collected for all the people of a specified territory or country at regular intervals. It is an important method of collecting information about people of a particular territory or a country. It provides information about the economy of a nation, rate of birth and death, rural-urban migration, living standard of people, family size, educational achievements, so on and so forth. Thus, population census is an official enumeration of the inhabitants of a country with statistics relating to their location, age, sex, marital status, literacy status, language, educational level, economic activity, number of children, etc. So, dear learners, I hope you have understood what is meant by census. Let us now discuss some of the important features of census which will help us gain greater clarity about what is census. So, census, the first feature is that it is a periodic and systematic collection of information about the population of a country. It is usually conducted at an interval of 10 years. The census collects in-depth and objective information related to the demographics of a nation. A stipulated time period is fixed to carry out census operations in the country. The Government of India has formed Census Commission to carry out census operations in the country judiciously. The Census Commission carries out census at the interval of every 10 years, and it is responsible for preparing the guidelines, rules, regulations, procedures, and scientific ways to carry out the census operations. For census operations in India, every household is regarded as a single unit. Moreover, in large census operations, informations are also collected from migrant individuals, homeless persons, for whom the enumeration happens at the night time at their place of rest or sleep. Before starting the census operations, the Census Commission of India prepares schedules, house listed the households in each area, provides training to the enumerators, etc. During census operations, the enumerators collect the data by door-to-door visit to every household. But in the case of some countries, the information is also collected by sending schedules to the household via post. Everyone can have access to census data. The recorded census data after the completion of the enumeration process are published for circulation. Official website of the Census Commission makes census data easily accessible to all. Due to such openness and transparency, census has become an important, reliable source of demographic information of the country. So, dear learners, I hope you have understood the features of census. Let us now discuss the uses and applications of census. Census is very useful for administrative purposes, for socio-economic planning and policy making. It is also important for research because census provides holistic and comprehensive data and information on the population. Similarly, from the census data, one can understand the trends of growth of population, the pattern of demographic change, changes in sex ratio, fertility, mortality, urbanization, so on and so forth. And based on this data, data on growth of population, changes in population size, so on and so forth, planning can be done and there can be policy interventions for socio-economic welfare of the people. Census data is also the basis of other surveys, other kind of researches. Again, by using census data, calculations of birth and death rate can be done, life tables can be constructed, economic developments can be evaluated, so on and so forth. And census data can also be used for population projections or for predicting the trend of future population growth, how the future demographic changes will take place. This kind of prediction is also possible based on the present census data. So, dear learners, we have learned that census data has number of uses. It helps in further research. It helps in undertaking different studies on Indian population. It helps planners and policymakers to come up with policies for human development, so on and so forth. Now, dear learners, let us try to understand the history of census. Collecting information about people or enumerating people is not solely a present-day phenomenon. Such activities were carried out during the ancient periods in different countries like Egypt, Babylonia, India, China, Palestine, and Rome. The Sumerians too collected data on population and enumerated them for the purpose of taxation. In ancient Egypt, informations were collected regarding the occupation of people. In India too, census operations were undertaken during the reign of Emperor Ashoka. In the 3rd century BC, Kautilya's Arthashastra prescribed the collection of population statistics as a measure of state policy for the purpose of taxation. Even during the reign of Akbar in 18th century, population data were collected. Thus, it has been observed that some sort of population enumeration or collection of information on population were undertaken during different periods in the early history of human civilization. The purpose of such enumeration or collection of population data was mainly for a taxation purpose, conscription, or both. However, such enumerations were not regular and mostly need-based. That is, the enumerations were done only when there was a need for it. Further, those enumerations were only confined to specific segments of the population and not the entire territory. The process of census operation, which had its beginning in the ancient period as we have discussed, has however evolved in the course of human history and across civilizations to such an extent that now almost every progressive country across the globe has their own ways and histories of recording and gathering information about population in the form of census. In modern days, the census is widely in practice across the globe and is instrumental in collecting myriad information about individuals of a country concerned. However, the modern census is different from the earlier ones. It was only in the 17th and the 18th centuries that the modern concept of census took its shape, where there is enumeration of the entire population of a particular territory is conducted, and information is also gathered on the changing trends and patterns of population growth, its structure and characteristics. Now coming to the Indian context, modern day census in India has been a colonial introduction. It was probably due to the strategic administrative need of the colonial empire that the census in its present form has evolved in India roughly in the years between 1867 to 1872. The census then happened non-synchronously across different parts of the country. It did not cover the entire country. The effort of the initial recording of information in the form of census got culminated in the year 1872. But systematically, the first synchronous census covering a wider area in India took place in the year 1881. And since then, an unbroken chain of censuses were undertaken at regular intervals of 10 years, which gives the Indian census a unique historical legacy in the world. Census, by collecting information about vital aspects of population like birth, death, sex ratio, distribution of population, literacy rate, religion, occupation, migration, and so on and so forth, helps in acquiring in-depth, empirical, and ground-based data about the demographic dynamics of the country. And it has also become the most reliable source of demographic data in the country. The population census of India thus provides basic statistics on state human resources, demography, culture, and economic structure at local, regional, and national level. The recent census of 2011 is the 15th census in the series of Indian censuses since 1872 and has been ranked as the 7th in the position since independence. The post-1949 censuses in India have been conducted by the Office of the Registrar General and Census Commissioner of India under the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. The entire censuses since 1951 have been conducted under the 1948 Census of India Act. The census operations in India have been carried out in two phases. Phase 1 is house listing and housing census, and phase 2 is population enumeration. The 1951 census was the first census of independent India. Its report discussed population growth in the country, structure of population, and its economic development. The report also focused on the exponential growth of Indian population and emphasized the need for curbing the rapid growth of population. Microplannings were made possible with the data gathered from this census, and it brought out the data of smaller administrative units like a village or an urban block. The 1961 census brought out several comprehensive reports on the Indian population. Nearly 1400 reports were prepared based on the data collected during the census. It was during this census that information on tribes were gathered and analyzed for the first time in India. Several studies on the socio-cultural and demographic aspects of Indian population, such as villages, fairs and festivals, languages, cities, etc., were conducted based on the data and information gathered by this census. The 1991 census prepared a questionnaire basically comprising of 3 items: the house list, the household schedule, and the individual sleep. Now coming to the latest 2011 census, it has some unique features. What are these? They are that in this census there was the introduction of unique form number and barcodes in each schedule. A provision was made for recording institutional households in this census. Again, in 2011 census, a unique provision has been made to record one's gender identity as a gender other than strictly male or female. This is a radical departure from the past censuses. Separate codes have also been assigned in the 2011 census for the category of divorced and separated. Finally, in 2011 census, there has been a vast expansion on the question of disability, and in this census, 8 codes on disability were included in contrast to 5 codes in the 2001 census. The population enumeration data from census 2011 also includes some interesting tables that reveal the patterns of migration of people across India and the important reasons behind this migration. So we have discussed about some of the details about Indian censuses in the post-independence period, and at present we have census data series on different aspects of Indian population like age, area, household populations, decadal variation in population, disability, education, female-headed households, fertility, general economic tables, household, house listing and housing census data, language, marital status, migration, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, slums, towns, village directories and geocodes, so on and so forth. So currently the census provides us with a very comprehensive, elaborate and detailed data set on Indian population, which is highly useful for researchers, planners and policymakers, public administrators, so on and so forth. So dear learners, from this discussion, we have learned about the history of census, especially in the Indian context, and how it has evolved over time by adding newer dimensions of human and social life. Let us now briefly discuss about the different census publications. Dear learners, as we have previously mentioned, the information gathered through census are published for the wider audience so that the public can have access to this data. The census data are primarily published through 2 series. Basically, number 1 is the All India tables and series 2 is the table for different states and union territories. The different census tables are general population tables, general economic tables, socio-cultural tables, migration tables, fertility tables, tables on houses and household amenities, so on and so forth. The primary census abstract is published based on the census data. In addition, there are special tables on scheduled caste and scheduled tribes being published by the census. Further, district census handbook containing all details about the district is prepared for every district in the country, and a village directory is also published for every village. Hence, the census provides comprehensive and holistic information about every Indian population. So, dear learners, from this discussion, I hope you have understood what is census, what are its features, the history of census enumerations, especially in India, and the different kinds of data and information collected by Indian censuses. Further, we have also learned about the different publications of censuses from which we can obtain data on different aspects of Indian population. Now let us discuss about another very important source of population data, that is the civil registration system. Registration data has been the second most important source of demographic data in the country. It can be categorized as the secondary source of demographic data. According to the United Nations definition, registration is nothing but a continuous, permanent, and compulsory recording of the occurrence of vital events like birth, death, fetal death, marriage, divorce, as well as annulments, judicial separation, adoptions, legitimations, and recognitions. This data source sought to acquire certain vital information about the individuals residing in the country. The entire process of registration is based on the condition that every citizen of the country is legally entitled to register information about the vital events of their life like birth, death, marriage, divorce, so on and so forth to the concerned authorities of the region to which he or she belongs. Unlike other statistical sources, registration requires active civic participation and is being performed under a law, decree, or a regulation. Registrations of such vital statistics are being carried out all throughout the year, and one can register such information as per their convenience. Registration data, therefore, have been an important source of demographic information, granted that the people of the country should consider it as their civic responsibility to record such informations judicially. Let us now briefly discuss about the history of registration data. The history of civil registration data can be traced back to Europe. Through the practices of collecting information about baptism, burials, and weddings by the churches actually have been in practice since much earlier time in Europe. Vital registration system has its systematic beginnings only during the 19th and the 20th centuries. The first civil registration system was said to have emerged in England and Wales in 1836 and then in Scotland in 1854. In India, the history of civil registration goes back to the middle of the 19th century and is regarded as almost contemporary in its origin to the first population census of the country. Ironically, at the very beginning, the process of civil registration started with registration of deaths only. This was initially conducted by the colonial administrators with a view to introduce sanitary reforms in certain parts of the country so that they can have control over the diseases with which the country's population has been fighting hard during those decades. Registration of birth, however, started later, but chronologically as early as in 1866. In 1866, the colonial government passed the Central Birth, Death and Marriage Registration Act to provide voluntary registrations in British India. The erstwhile central province of Berar, which is the modern-day Vidarbha in Hyderabad, was the first to introduce the system of registration of births. Punjab and the United Provinces were next to follow Berar immediately. Nevertheless, the process of registration so started has got official acclamation in the year 1873 with the passing of an act called the Bengal Births and Death Registration Act. Bihar and Orissa followed Bengal immediately and without any delay introduced the act in their respective region. The second phase of official induction of registration started in 1886 when the Birth, Death and Marriage Registration Act as placed on the statute book to provide voluntary registration in the entire British India. A few provinces like the erstwhile composite Madras as well as Bengal had their own specific acts. These were subsequently adopted by other states by incorporating necessary provisions about registration in their municipal act, Panchayat Act, so on and so forth. Thus, registration so conducted came to be governed by a number of acts, executive orders, bylaws, or local registration procedures in the subsequent time. After independence, however, the office of the Registrar General of India was created in 1951 and the Vital Statistics Department was transferred to this office from the Director of Health Services in 1960. Again, on deliberations and recommendations of various committees, the Registration of Birth and Death Act was enacted by Parliament to enforce uniform civil registration throughout the country. This act, so introduced, mandates the use of uniform birth and death reporting forms and certificates to individuals throughout the country. Since then, the registration data has been a vital source of information about citizenship, marital status, succession rights, and settlement of disputes regarding birth and death of individuals in the country. Thus, registration data assists us to acquire the flow data for demographic analysis, that is, data related to incidence rather than prevalence. Let us now discuss about the two important sources of registration data. Dear learners, registration data in the country are usually collected from two main sources. One is the vital registration, which records information about the vital statistics like birth, date, marriage, divorce, etc. of a person concerned. It is the obligation of every individual of the country to record such information to the office or the authorities of his or her region concerned. The second is population registration. Population registration is the source of collecting registered information under the registration data. This serves as an important source of collecting and compiling demographic information. Though in many of the countries of Europe and Asia, population registration is mandatory for every citizen residing in those countries, India is yet to make a distinct mark to accommodate information about every citizen of the country through population registration. So, dear learners, with this, you have learned what is registration system and the history of civil registration system, especially in India. Let us now discuss about a few limitations of this system in India. In India, the coverage of vital registration system is still not very satisfactory. This is because there is underreporting of the vital events in the country and therefore the data generated through this system is not very adequate. The extent of underreporting or non-reporting of vital events is higher in the context of rural areas. Mass illiteracy and lack of awareness among the rural population are reasons behind this. So, because there is underreporting or non-reporting of vital events, therefore the data generated through civil registration system is still not very satisfactory in India. Dear learners, with this we have come to the conclusion of today's module. In this module, we have learned about two very important sources of population data, that is census and registration system. We have learned how these two sources records population data and how we can obtain information regarding the population from these two data sources. I hope you have understood what has been discussed in this module. In the next module, we shall be discussing population surveys as other important sources of population data. In that module, we will be discussing about different types of population surveys which records informations and data on population. So with this, we end here today. Thank you.